This is the most important water conference I've attended in Canada in a decade. And 6 years after returning from the Rosenberg International Forum on Water Policy, I predicted that what is happening to Lake Winnipeg would soon be recognized as a national environmental catastrophe. And I was wrong. It's actually worse than that. It's worse because what is expected here is different and more problematic than we expected. And it's worse because what's happening elsewhere in the world with similar problems has become more serious also. I'm grateful as a Canadian that this forum has recognized that what has happened to Lake Winnipeg is really important. It has real significance. It's important to recognize what's really happening here and what it means. The institutional structures and arrangements upon which we rely for proactive and effective governance of matters like this are clearly not working as well as they should. And what is happening is Lake Winnipeg means that the ways in which we've organized ourselves to address such problems in the past have to be reformed. And this is a lesson not just for people who live in the Lake Winnipeg Basin. It's a lesson for all Canadians. Right now, a good outcome here is not assured. We need to look at the Lake Winnipeg problems differently. While the Lake Winnipeg situation has been characterized principally as an environmental problem, this forum today clearly demonstrates that it's actually much more than that. And as someone said earlier, a Band-Aid approach is not going to work in this basin. And if we continue to nibble away at the edge of the problems, we stand risk of losing control of the entire situation. So what I'm trying to say is the situation is more serious than perhaps we might think. And it's critical, clearly, that we do not cross the threshold leading to the irreversible collapse of biodiversity-based planetary life support function of the Lake Winnipeg system. And I would submit also that crossing that threshold will result in wholesale deterioration of the way of life of every person who lives within this system. And I can tell you also from having just participated in the Water for the Americas Forum in Buenos Aires, if Lake Winnipeg's system collapses, living here will be very different than it is now. And you may be facing, in some parts of the lake system, deteriorated environmental circumstances that you might expect in a developing country. In Latin America, 75% of their lake systems are eutrophied. If you'd like to see what that's like, I suggest you go there. It's certainly not what we want to have here. So, the question one might ask is, what can we learn from international example that would be helpful to us in this basin? And the first thing that we can learn, or should learn, is that others have been where we are now long before us and have responded to situations similar to these in a variety of ways. We learn from Asia and Latin America is that if we continue to move in an uncoordinated way, in the way we're currently moving, the results will be predictable but unfortunate. We will be overwhelmed by our own jurisdictional fragmentation and institutional territoriality, and the quality of our physical environments will continue to deteriorate. We will reach thresholds that will make it impossible to recover what we've lost. If we examine what Europe did in certain similar circumstances, however, we discover surprising, even exciting possibility. The Danube is the most international of all the world's rivers. 18 countries share its waters. The Danube is the second largest river basin in Europe, covering some 800,000 square kilometers. Besides being a major river basin in its own right, the Danube also possesses a number of sub-basins that in themselves are among the most important international river basins in Europe. It's interesting to note the similarities between the Danube and its delta and the river systems that flow into Lake Winnipeg. First of all, the basins are roughly the same size. The Lake Winnipeg Basin, at about 950 square kilometers, is a little bit bigger, but close enough an area to make other comparisons useful. The second thing we note is that both are international basins. 18 jurisdictions preside over the fate of the Danube, 2 nations, 4 Canadian provinces, and 4 American states. A total of 10 jurisdictions preside over the future of Lake Winnipeg. Both basins face serious environmental threats. Surface and groundwater quality in the Danube Basin have deteriorated over time as a result of the cumulative consequences of a number of human impacts. And this will interest you. A transboundary analysis identified no fewer than 513 pollution hotspots. Analysis also revealed that about 80% of the historical floodplain habitat of the Danube has been lost to development and other impacts. And we know that many of the problems that you're facing here in this basin are not dissimilar. A unique feature of the Danube is its remarkable delta, which forms the world's largest reed bed complex. This extraordinary natural feature is largely situated in Romania, with a portion in the Ukraine where the Danube enters the Black Sea. This area is an important binational biosphere reserve. The reserve covers some 670,000 hectares, including floodplains and marine areas. The core of the reserve, some 312,000 hectares, has been designated as a World Heritage Site. And I would submit to you that Lake Winnipeg is our Black Sea. Notice that even their pelicans resemble ours. Now that is as far as the comparisons between these two basins will take us for the moment, because they did something about the problem and we have yet to do so. And in that context, what they did should be of great interest to us. It's interesting to note that it was the protection of the Black Sea that became the initial common concern behind cleanup efforts along the entire transboundary course of the Danube, and one of the main reasons for the creation of the International Commission for the Protection of the Danube River. The deteriorating quality of the Danube provided both an impetus and an incentive to international cooperation. Efforts began to formalize cooperation through the development of a convention signed in Bulgaria in 1994. 6 years later, on December 22, 2000, the European Union Water Framework Directive came into existence. And this directive was mentioned today by Dimple Roy, and this is an important consideration and perhaps a model for us. The European Union states in the Danube Basin, which at the time included only Germany and Austria, were obligated through the directive to make major changes in the way they manage their water resources. And looking back, it's possible to see how a specific directive aimed at improving water management practices in only 2 of the Danube's 18 riparian states became a crystal around which the entire region was, over time, able to begin cooperating toward the same high water quality standards as a basis, again, of sustainable development. The European Union Water Framework Directive demanded an enormous amount, it seemed, from the outset, from the partners. It set uniform standards for water policy throughout the entire European Union and integrated different policy areas involving water. It introduced the river basin approach for the development of integrated and coordinated river basin management for all European river systems. It stipulated a defined time frame for the achievement of acceptable ground and surface water quality improvements. A transnational monitoring network was created. Danube nations have also created an accident early warning system that provides accidental pollution warnings and announcements. Coordinated efforts have also been made to respond to floods. And now, most interestingly, the Water Framework Directive is working at unifying agricultural and water policy. So, what can we learn from the Danube about the evolution of our institutions so that we can manage transboundary water issues more effectively and productively? The first thing we might learn is that there is value in comparing the multi-jurisdictional circumstances of Europe to the state, provincial, and federal jurisdictions that exist in North America and in this basin. And as in the case of the Nile River Basin, the realization that transboundary cooperation was not really optional, was driven by urgency, and in this case, emergency. And it was in no one's interest to let the quality of the water in the Danube or the ecological health of the Black Sea continue to deteriorate. And the cooperative process got off to a new start when 2 of the Danube states led the way with the introduction of higher standards for water quality improvement and with procedures for integrating water resource management. The next step in the process was to fund support for countries unable to meet the newer, higher standards on their own. What's really important about this case study is that it suggests that new directions and progress toward the establishment of new institutions does not always have to come, at least immediately, from on high. The idea can come from any trusted combination of partners who share approaches and expertise in ways that will allow other riparian neighbors, whether they're sovereign states or simply provinces, to find and fund their way to success. The key was that somebody had to make the initial commitment. Without leadership nationally, and only self-interest at most provincial levels, it will be very difficult for any kind of vision to emerge that will be strong enough to change our institutions so they can change our future. Some will argue that we need a disaster like the catastrophic contamination of the Danube to get us going. And I would submit to you, if that's true, then we're in a lot more trouble than we think. Lake Winnipeg should not have to die or the Saskatchewan River stop flowing before any meaningful change becomes possible. International example provides clear instruction on what we have to do. There's no time to waste. Wholesale regulatory, economic, agricultural, and institutional reform is required, and nothing less will do. It's not going to be easy, but if a river basin in Europe of roughly the same size with nearly twice the number of jurisdictions, 15 times the population, 18 official languages, far greater economic disparity between the jurisdictions, and environmental problems even more terrifying than ours can figure out a way to work together to save their river and their threatened delta, then we can too. All we have to do is want to. We need a new vision, and having a new vision is what this forum is about. Thank you.